We're here in Berwyn to announce some very good news. We're pleased to be distributing over $51 million in much needed relief funding to local governments throughout Cook County for coronavirus related expenses. Of these over 100 villages, towns, cities, Berwyn is one of the largest recipients of this support based on an equitable funding formula that we put together and we're quite proud of. Berwyn will be allocated $788,000 that can cover coronavirus-related expenses. In April, Cook County received approximately $429 million from the CARES Act, the federal relief program for coronavirus expenses. Under the Act, units of local government with a population exceeding 500,000 are eligible to receive this funding and may distribute these funds to municipalities under this threshold for direct expenses related to coronavirus. The main consideration for allocating the funds was socioeconomic determinants and public health needs. As we know, COVID-19 is having a disproportionate impact on Black and brown communities, and this approach is designed to ensure these dollars are going to communities most impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. And as I'm sure the mayor can tell you, Berwyn is one of the communities that has been most heavily impacted. Allocations to each municipality were determined through an equitable lens, with factors that also included the immediate needs of the municipality to respond to the pandemic, the population of the municipality, the median income of the municipality, and public health statistics for the community. We worked to create an equitable funding formula with the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, CMAP, and I'm proud of the results. We've created a consistent, thorough, equitable process to distribute millions of dollars in CARES Act funding to underlying municipalities for direct coronavirus-related costs, such as personal protective equipment, operational initiatives to facilitate return to work arrangements, and specific economic development efforts for Cook County communities. Developing an enormous grant program from the ground up has been a giant undertaking, and we're pleased to start getting the money out to our townships, our cities, towns, and villages. Now I'd like to invite the mayor up to say a few words. Mayor Lovero.
Thank you, President Preckwinkle. So I'm pleased today to join Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle and Cook County Commissioner Frank Aguilar. We're announcing the CARES Act funding anticipated for our city, which the President just announced. Cook County received funding from the CARES Act, which is now being distributed to suburban municipalities within the county, much like Berwyn. As the second highest densely populated city in Cook County, it took many interagency collaborations to keep our essential city services and emergency management a success for our city. I want to sincerely thank all our first responders and essential workers here in Berwyn for keeping our city moving forward. Berwyn has a large, diverse population, and as the President said, Black and brown communities have been struck very hard by the virus. We participated in the COVID-19 cases and deaths in keeping our citizens informed, especially amongst our Black and brown communities. Berwyn's no exception, but it is resilient. We will recover and will continue to keep you informed, serviced, and safe. This funding will allow us to reimburse COVID-19 related expenses like PPE purchases and economic development efforts. I'd also like to acknowledge our City Administrator, Ruth Ciaba Green, who's been working heavily with the COVID-19 expenses, Ben Daish and his entire financial staff, because without them, they're very instrumental in procuring the funds and also letting us know where our assets need to go. I would also like to thank the residents and businesses of Berwyn for their cooperation and support during this challenging time. I'm deeply grateful to you, President Preckwinkle, and Cook County for their equitable approach to distributing these funds. This formula demonstrates the county's commitment to recovery in the communities that need it most. Thank you all for listening. With that, I'd like to introduce our Cook County Commissioner in this area, Frank Aguilar.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Madam President. First, I would like to thank President Preckwinkle not only for her leadership, but for making my transition to this position so seamless. I would also like to genuinely thank her and her staff for being so welcoming and supportive. My first day as commissioner was a little over 2 months ago, and I spent each day listening and looking for ways to work with others to better District 16. Today is just an example that President Preckwinkle has taken steps to ensure communities throughout Cook County would directly benefit from the relief funds. Most importantly, those communities in most need. Very early on, I recognized how great needed in our district these funds would be. Our local health and public safety officers have dedicated countless hours and resources to making our communities safe during the pandemic. No one came to 2020 expecting the need to budget funds for a global pandemic. No one could anticipate businesses shutting down, schools closing, parents being laid off, and most of our vulnerable residents being forced to stay at home. But it happened. Thanks to President Preckwinkle, her leadership, more than $1 million will be distributed to the communities throughout the District 16. Our elected officials, communities, in our communities, like Mayor Lovero, have incurred unexpected expenses due to COVID-19. He would have been facing questions: where will be the funds coming from, or what services might have to cut in order to continue providing much-needed services to residents. These funds being announced today will ensure our communities have additional resources not only to cover unexpected services, but it will also allow them to continue providing services for those residents in need. I will close by my acknowledgement of COVID-19 have left our communities suffering. My heart goes out to the victims of this pandemic, and I hope everyone in our community continues to use reason and caring decisions making to keep everyone safe. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Amar Risky. I'm the Cook County's Chief Financial Officer. President Preckwinkle did an excellent job of succinctly explaining the complicated allocation process that aims to equitably distribute the CARES funds to our municipal partners. To give a little bit of a background, the equitable effort and approach, we initially received these funds from the U.S. Treasury in late April, with little guidance on eligibility of the cost for both ourselves and our local suburban jurisdictions. One thing was for sure was that these funds cannot unfortunately be used for revenue loss, which many of our local jurisdictions, like the county itself, desperately need. Nevertheless, over the past 2 months, we've been working diligently to address this need for the county itself, and at the same time, build a fair and equitable model to get this money to our underlying jurisdictions in Cook County. We are proud of what we've developed in a short time frame. We think our approach is responsible, fair, and most importantly, works to match the money to its needs. Even before the pandemic, we knew several communities in our southern and southwestern part of our county were economically challenged. And the pandemic just made those challenges worse. This is why looking through an equity lens was such an important piece, and why we wanted to take a tactful approach to deliberately approach this to allocate these funds from an equitable perspective. Allocations to each municipalities were determined by the factors like immediate needs of the municipality, to respond to the pandemic, municipal population, municipal median income, and municipal public health statistics. Just to give you an example, using just one of these socioeconomic factors, which is the median income. The median income for Cook County across the board, which includes the city of Chicago, is about $63,000 per person. However, when you look at the data more closely, there are significant disparities between the southern parts of the county versus some of the northern parts, where the median income, this number, is almost double. Hence, the reason why we chose to make sure that the equity lens is applied in this distribution. I want to thank Madam President, our Bureau of Finance team, and partners like the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning for the help in putting this pretty sophisticated model together in a short period of time that distributes these funds in an equitable manner. Thank you.
Thank you, and now we'll take questions. Is there anyone on the line?
Hi, good morning. This is Alex Dipkin for Daily Line. How are you?
Alex, good morning.
Hi. So, first, I wanted to ask Amar a little bit about what kinds of, I guess, guardrails are on this funding, how it may be used by municipalities and it may not. And then maybe if Mayor Lovero could talk a little bit, give some specifics about how this funding is going to be used in Berwyn. What parts of the budget that Berwyn's budget would feed into, and how specifically it would help residents.
All right, let me see if I have your questions, Alex, for the benefit of our translators, both sign language and Spanish. So the first question is, what are the guardrails around the funding? And that's an Amar question. And how the funding will be used in Berwyn. And of course, that's a question for the mayor. Let's start with Amar.
Thank you, Alex. So in terms of guardrails, since the time we received this funding initially, we've received several iterations of eligibility rules from the U.S. Department of Treasury, which speaks to what this funding can be used for. Specifically, any direct expenses, for example, PPE, the equipment that our first responders need, our public health officials need, that those types of expenses, as well as any operational needs as we return back to our opening our communities and our buildings for public interaction. There's going to be a lot of initiatives being implemented that are going to help make sure that we're safely opening these buildings back up. And so a lot of those eligibility requirements are going to be sort of watched out for and made sure that we are working with our partners like the city of Berwyn and other municipalities, that they understand that, and then they can ensure they're in compliance with those. And so those are the main eligibility rules. In terms of how we're going to work with them, we've set up a process which is a reimbursement process. They have to submit the invoices to us, and we have some folks who are experts in this space who will be working with us, as well as the cities and towns across the county, to make sure that we have the eligibility requirements met, and then we will go ahead and reimburse those funds to those communities. Mayor Lovero? Thank you.
So we have to evaluate these eligibility requirements. And we've known since we received notice from the county that they were receiving these dollars, that Berwyn would be potentially entitled to some of it. So what our finance department has been doing is keeping track of all our COVID-related expenses, especially PPE. What we did here in Berwyn is we set up a command staff according to the NIMS guidelines, the National Incident Management System. And that command staff included myself, my chief of police, my chief of fire, and our finance director, so that we can keep all the costs in bundle. They were then funneled out to the officer who was in charge of operations and purchasing the necessary items we needed for COVID protection, like PPE, like hand sanitizers, and the such. So we have those bundled so that we know what exactly was spent during this COVID for COVID emergencies and COVID protection. Once we get the eligibility requirements, we'll see how those fit in, and we'll apply appropriately for the reimbursement for those items. Thank you.
Alex, did you have any further questions?
I'll throw in one more, which is, Madam President, you were talking about a formula to derive how much would go to each municipality. municipality. Is that, the specific formula, will that be released? Can the public see that?
All right, so the question was about the formula that was used. I'm going to ask Amar to answer the question.
Thank you. Yes. So our initial priority was to make sure that we work with our communities that needed these fundings first and foremost, and make sure they understood the approach we're taking, as well as what the eligibility rules and some of the other requirements that the federal government has placed on us regarding these funds were clear. And so that's what we've been spending most of our time on over the past few weeks. In the coming week or so, we should be having more information coming out specifically that goes into more detail about the formula and how it was derived in conjunction with our partners, the Chicago Metropolitan Agency on Planning. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else on the line? Alex, you've had all your questions answered?
I guess I might as well, again, just ask about another potential round of federal stimulus. It keeps coming up, but now it seems like these conversations are happening maybe a little bit more in earnest in Washington. So I know you've been saying that you've been lobbying and talking to members of Congress, but any update to report or anything else that you want to say about that right now?
All right, so the question is, what's the update on the possibility of another round of federal funding? As you're all aware, in May, the House passed what it calls the HEROES Act, which would provide support to local units of government for lost revenue. The CARES Act provides support for coronavirus-related expenses, but did not compensate local units of government for lost revenue. So we're hopeful that the Senate will take up the HEROES Act or some variant that provides support to local units of government when they return from recess July 20th. So we anticipate that there will be some Senate action in July, late July or early August, especially since the enhanced unemployment benefits run out July 31st, and we continue to struggle economically. And Mayor Lovero has a response as well.
So in addition to the reimbursement under the CARES Act through the county, the federal government has directly allotted to the city of Berwyn through our Community Development Block Grant Program underneath the direction of our director, Regina Mendocino, sums of money that is being sent to a company called Moving Forward, which has been very instrumental in helping us find places for homeless people, which has been very instrumental in applying for people who lost their jobs and couldn't pay their mortgage or couldn't pay their rent. So there's a program all set up underneath that federal guideline, which is independent from this, with respect to the federal guidelines as to how that money could be spent, and Housing Forward is going to administer those sums on behalf of the city of Berwyn. So that's another avenue with respect to the federal funds.
Thank you, Mayor, for that addition. Any other questions? Is there anyone on the line besides Alex? All right, hearing none. Thank you all for joining us.